guys, and welcome back to the Basketball Fix podcast. Now, we're continuing on with our one-on-ones, and I've got a special guest for everyone involved in NBL world, and you can see him on the screen right now, and you'll know his voice as soon as he starts talking. I'm speaking of NBL commentary member and obviously NBL media member, Jack Heverin. Jack, welcome to the show, mate.
Hey, Josh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, I've obviously really appreciate your time. I know it's a very busy period. I'm looking forward to obviously touching on your media career because you've got a lot of things going on in it, but I know obviously the family time as well over this Christmas and this festivity period as well, mate. So I really appreciate you coming on, but let's go straight into it, mate. I think your media career is an interesting one. Doing a bit of research here, you've been involved in local football, obviously the cricket, the NBL as we all know, and also lawn bowls as well, mate. So look at to kind of get back into where it all started and where did it start and where did the passion sort of brew?
To be honest, Josh, it sort of happened by accident. So I didn't necessarily grow up wanting to be a commentator, but now I look back and there's all these different stories of me, shooting hoops in the driveway and commentating my own games. And one of my first sort of sporting memories, I was 5 when the 1990 grand final happened in the AFL between Collingwood and Essendon, and my pop, who's one of my favourite people on the planet, is a mad Collingwood supporter. So I used to watch the video, VHS, which probably means nothing to you, but for people my age, there was a thing called VHS. I watched that over and over. So there's all these different kind of memories of loving sport. I actually love the sports side of things and the game more than playing a lot of them. I love playing basketball, but even for footy, I love the sort of game more than actually playing. But I didn't study it. I didn't have any ambition to do it coming out of high school. I actually had no idea what I wanted to do. And I guess the only thing that I sort of did want to do was maybe go overseas. So I went and played cricket in 2005 in England, just local level, nothing spectacular. Came back and thought, okay, well, I've got to actually get a job. I've sort of spent all of Dad's money now that he loaned me for the trip. So I need to pay him back. So I got a job in sales. That's what he was doing. I thought that was a good way to get going. And this is the accident part. It was just by pure accident. We used to go and watch our local footy team play every week. And they were all the guys that I sort of grew up playing with, but I didn't keep playing. And a good friend of mine who became a great mentor and is no longer with us, unfortunately, he was the local commentator on radio for community radio. And he tapped me on the shoulder the night before at the local pub and said, mate, can you help me out? The guy I was doing it was pulled out. And it just so happened to be that it was our local team playing one of the local rivals. So I knew every player back to front. And I said, oh, all right, okay, I'll give it a go. And I don't think you have too many of these moments in life. But for me, it was the one moment where about 5 minutes into the game, I was calling a passage of play and I'd never done it before. And it was kind of like the light bulb went off and I was 21, 22. And I went, this is it. This is actually, I've worked it out. This is what I actually want to do. So that's how it got started. But from there, it was a really, really long road, even just to get an opportunity to do it professionally.
No, definitely, mate. And obviously it's incredible just to start because I was reading up about it and I was just like, it's incredible just to think. I believe it was 2009, was it, that you started doing it roughly? Was it around that sort of time?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously
around then.
Now. Yeah, it's huge.
Well, this is the sort of cold hard fact of the industry that I had to go through, and I guess everyone, you're out there publishing your own stuff at the moment, you and your crew, and there is just no easy passage into doing this professionally, unfortunately. I sort of say the same thing if I'm ever asked to do a talk at a uni or a TAFE or something like that. You got to do the hard yards, and for me, there was nearly 5 years of community radio. It started with calling the footy, and then it progressed into doing the Saturday morning cricket show. I was playing cricket in the league, and then I started to dabble around with doing some stuff on their drive show and learning how to panel and produce and edit and all these different things at community radio. As I say, that was 5 years before I eventually got an opportunity to be paid to do it. And that first gig, Josh, was overnights. So it was midnight till 6 a.m. on your own. No producer, no nothing, just basically talking to yourself and the listeners. So, it's sometimes you look back and you think, geez, that was hard at the start, but it was all worth it.
Bit of graveyard stuff, mate. It's obviously the best way to find your feet, I guess, as well. But I want to ask this question, mate, because this is always interesting. Now, I'm a massive football fan. I'm a massive NBA guy, an NBL guy, but I'm not sure which one I would prefer to cover as a commentator, but you got the AFL, the NBL, and also the Test match with the cricket and everything going on. What's your favourite sport to cover, mate, and why?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is going to be such a fence-sitting answer. I'm sorry. But I say the same thing every time, so I've got to be consistent. As a kid, I loved all three. I was a mad. I'm sure we'll get to it, but the NBL in the '90s was I was more passionate about that than what I was about footy or cricket. Cricket actually came a little bit later for me. I sort of didn't really start playing properly until I was about 15, and footy was we're a big footy house. My dad was our junior coach and loved his footy and all that sort of stuff. So to get the opportunity now to do all three of them, and it's a bit of a juggle at times, but I love them all for different reasons. I mean, footy, there's really nothing like a Friday night game at the MCG with 90,000 and all that sort of thing. It's a fast game. It's 360. It speaks for itself. I know Test cricket and cricket isn't for everyone, particularly my partner, but I love it. I love the longest form of the game. I love, when they get the red ball out in the white clothes. I'm here in Sydney today for the last test. So I love that, and it's something that I love. But the NBL is something that I'm sort of more emotionally connected to. As I say, it was a big part of my life in the '90s, and then I watched it fall off the perch like all of us did, and now it's on this incredible rise back up. That you can compare eras all you like, but what's going on right now is pretty special, and I feel quite emotionally attached to that as well. So yeah, I guess I love them all for different reasons, and I want to do all three of them for as long as I possibly can.
No, definitely. I think, like you said there, you summed it up pretty perfectly there. The AFL and the NBL are pretty up and down sports and a bit more intense from start to finish. But I could imagine, mate, obviously calling a massive wicket in a test match would be one of the best feelings as well, with 90,000 on Boxing Day going off their chops as well. But obviously, you sort of spoke about it there. It's pretty hard to get a start in the sports media world. What have been the biggest challenges, I guess, coming into it? Let's just sort of think that we're talking to a 16, 17-year-old at a uni, for example. What is one lesson or one piece of advice that you would give somebody trying to come through the scene?
Yeah, I would say learn everything. It was pretty consistent advice I got early on. And I go all the way back to, as I say, the community radio days. The station manager there was an ex-ABC executive who was sort of in semi-retirement. He was incredible for me early on. He told me to learn everything. And then when I started to get a job, as I say, my first opportunities were overnights where you had to panel and produce your own shows and then clip everything up and do all that sort of stuff. And then progressing into live sport producing, everyone that I spoke to that I respected their opinions and I wanted their opinion all said the same thing. And that was learn everything, because the days of just basically doing footy for 6 months and going on holidays are done. The days, I think, for people who haven't played at the highest level, you need to be able to do a bunch of different things. And the reality is that most of your opportunities will come through, if your desire is to be on air, your opportunities are going to come from other things, not from being on air. It's very rare that you get shoehorned from nowhere to an on-air position. Quite often you're the coffee boy to start with, and then you're the second producer, and then the assistant producer, and then the lead producer, or you're the panel op, all these different things. Just learn everything and understand that that's going to help you long term. And then the more you're around, you'll be amazed the more opportunities that just can come up as a result of just actually being around and being in the building.
Well, Larry, if you're listening to this right now, mate, if you need a coffee boy, I'm over in WA, and I will more than happy come and deliver you coffees once a day when you need it. But it's definitely a good insight. I think that is the thing, and that's it's just great. Obviously, that's the biggest thing, is just learning and just being a sponge. You hear it all the time. Being a sponge, absorb as much as you can, listen to as much as you can, and go from there. Now, we're going to go NBL here because we could go on a bit of a tangent about everything else. And before we get into sort of breaking down NBL25, what's been your favourite call so far in your career? Because you've been a part of some incredible games. Like, you've got Jack McVeigh's huge three-point shot last year, which is also a part of our intro song for our podcast. But what's been your favourite call all time in the NBL?
I love the Jack McVeigh moment. People can have their own opinion on whether they thought I did a good job of it or fine. That's up to them. But that moment was just like, I still shake my head and go, what in the world happened there? I actually, little story on that, Josh. I actually got caught out because no one expected Melbourne to turn the ball over off the inbound. Like, that was just calamitous. And then I actually didn't think Jack was going to be the one to shoot it. And this is why you should never try and predict and jump ahead. I actually thought Jack was going to bring the ball up the court and then kick it out to Milton Doyle. I thought Doyle would be the one to take the shot. We now know what we know about Jack, and he's ice cold and all that sort of stuff. So you might hear it. There's like an element of surprise in my voice where I was like, oh, holy shit, Jack's going to shoot this. So yeah, that was pretty amazing. That whole series was special. I'll never forget last year's grand final series as long as I live. And the other, not necessarily a call, but a specific game was the LaMelo Ball triple-double game. That was pretty important for me personally for a couple of reasons. One, it was a moment that I got to share with Andrew Gaze, who is one of my favourite people on earth, not just one of my favourite basketball people, but I love that man. And Corey Homicide Williams was with us in that call as well. And Corey, back in that day, we were doing everything from the studio. Corey bounced into the studio and he said, I'm telling you guys, LaMelo's going for a triple-double. And we're both sitting there having our fried rice going, oh, yeah, whatever, Corey. But then it's sort of the longer the game went, the more it happened. And it happened. And LaMelo knocked down a three to send them to overtime. And then he scored, I think, 8 points in OT and won them the game. And that was kind of the moment for LaMelo where he sort of justified the hype. And it was pretty cool to get your mates texting you stuff of, your highlights on SportsCenter and stuff like that. So, yeah, it was kind of like LaMelo's coming out game, but it was my coming out game in many respects as well. It was only my second year on the broadcast, and I was getting just little bits and pieces here or there. And that game sort of happened and it all went really well for the three of us. And then, Corey I found out later, was in the background sort of pushing my case forward to people at the NBL. So to have that memory, when he passed, I sat down with a glass of red and I watched that game from start to finish and I cried a lot. But that was, to share that with him and Gazy was pretty special.
Yeah, and I think you sort of said about coming out things as well. I think you could definitely say that was a massive moment in time for the NBL as well. But massive shout out to obviously Gazy, but in particular Homicide. We had him on the show a couple of years ago. And when you're talking about one of the most genuine and kind-hearted people in the world, Corey was one of them. And his passion and everything that he had involved in the NBL, every part of his blood and just everything about him just was oozing NBL basketball. And he's a massive reason to why the league is where it is today. And he will never be forgotten as well on the Basketball Fix and in the NBL coverage as well, mate. But let's get into NBL 25 because I thought NBL 24 was pretty good. But NBL 25, this is shaping up to be another year, mate. Like we talked about this on the show during the week. 2 teams on 13 wins, 3 teams on 11 wins, 2 teams on 9 wins, 2 teams at stage are on 7 wins but are now both on 8 wins. This season is as close as it possibly has been. What are your thoughts been on the season so far?
I agree with you, Josh. It's crazy. It's nuts. I don't bet on the NBL for obvious reasons, but I would pity anyone that is trying to have a little bit of a flutter on the NBL, gamble responsibly, of course, because you don't know what's going to happen. Even you look at the FIBA break, New Zealand was second on the table and shocked everyone. The bottom's fallen out of them in a big way, and it's a bit sad to watch. But I didn't have that as part of any predictions to have the Breakers in the top 2. I knew Illawarra were going to be really good because they're incredibly well coached, that they have just got this kind of mental fortitude that I'm not sure a lot of the other teams have got in terms of sticking together. So I knew they'd be up there. We knew Melbourne would be up there. I thought the Phoenix would be a top 4 team at the start, and they're getting there. They made me look a bit silly at 0-5, I must admit, but they're getting there. And the Kings, I'm off to watch the Kings and the Phoenix tonight, incidentally, and I can't work the Kings out. They can't work themselves out. That's the biggest thing. And I still think if they do work it out, I still think they can win the championship. But you watch them play some nights and you go, there's no way this team could win the championship. So, yeah, I think pretty similar to Tasmania last year. I think it might be about who's in the right form come the sort of back end of January and into February.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Like the Kings are 11-9, I believe they are right now. Something very similar to that. But they haven't played, like you said, good basketball, but they're just there. They're still floating there. They've got Cooks, they've got Adams, Cam Oliver. Hopefully that situation sorts it out. They've got another import on the way by all reports from Olgun and everyone else around the league. So it's exciting. But let's get into this question, mate. And I don't want you to sit on the fence on this one. Championship
Okay.
favourite for yourself right now, and why?
Illawarra, and I don't even need to think about that. For a lot of the reasons that I just said, I think they played the best basketball all year. I remember at Hoops Fest, their round one game, and I went, wow, they beat Cairns, and Cairns obviously got their struggles, but it was the way they went about it, and we saw them courtside, and Justin Tatum could have told them to go and jump off a cliff, and they would have lined up 2 by 2 to do it. So this group is on a mission. They don't want for anything. I think they're getting the best out of Tyler Harvey now, playing more off the ball, which I think has been a genius move. Sam Froling, I love as a player, and I think Sam's really starting to take that mantle now as one of the premier bigs in the competition. And then they've got all this depth. Wani Swakula-Bullock, Dave O'Hickey, Darius Days now coming off the bench, Todd Blanchfield. I could keep going. They are a seriously good basketball team who are seriously well coached. And the reason that I've still got them as favourites, Josh, is because you're going to have to beat them over 5 games. And you might beat them once, you might beat them twice. Can you beat them 3 out of 5 games? And I'm not sure at the moment anyone can.
Yeah, it's tough as well, because if you go down to that Wynn Entertainment Centre, they are incredibly hard to beat. I know the Phoenix just knocked them off over the weekend, but that place has just got to be, I think, up there as, we talk about MyState Bank Arena. Currently for the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers, you look back 5 years ago, the Wildcats never lost to RSC Arena. They are building a genuine fortress down there as well. And you spoke about that talent and that depth. They're all young guys as well. This team has got a genuine chance. They can continue to hold this together for many years. We could see some genuine success in Illawarra, which they've been starved of for so many years now as well. But what is some of your, thoughts on the improvements of the league? You could even just go back from last season. I think the overall depth is incredible, but what are some of the things that you're seeing? Because you're seeing the behind-the-scenes stuff, you're seeing the on-the-court stuff, and you're seeing it at a very close level.
I think this year has been a really interesting one in that it's been tense at times. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Like, I don't remember a year where we've had sort of players responding back to, Derek Rucker and Damon Lowry and some of the opinions and all those things. There was obviously the incident with Parker last year, and Derek, initially I thought Parker was sort of staring me down, and then I looked over my shoulder and there's Derek. I'm like, hey, you get in front and you sort that out with him. This has got nothing to do with me. But we didn't see a lot of that, whereas this year we're seeing more and more. What that tells me, Josh, is that the players are consuming what is happening within the NBL media sort of sphere, and the coaches talk about it in their press conference and all that sort of stuff as well. Adam Ford is one example. He'll say a lot about, like the guys spoke about on overtime, and even overtime's got a bit of a different look and feel to it this year as well. So I think that's been one of the biggest changes, is that there has been a bit more back and forth, but I think that's okay. I honestly don't think it's a big deal. Nothing's personal. I can tell you 150% for all the conspiracy theorists out there that there's no meetings and everyone sits around on a table and says, who can we get this week, or who can we take down? These are just people's opinions. The definition of opinion is it's neither right nor wrong. It's an opinion. And the players don't necessarily have to agree with what some of the guys have to say, and they don't have to like it either, to be truthful. But it is what it is. These guys are being paid to have an opinion and paid to comment.
Yeah, definitely. And I've got a few more questions based around the NBL media stuff as well, and we'll jump into that very shortly. But one more thing that I want to ask you, I think this season we've seen some of the greatest talent that we've ever seen. Now, we've obviously had eras in the NBL world where we've seen incredible players. I had Al Green on a couple of weeks ago, absolute stud back in the day. Leroy, obviously, Andrew Gaze, Leonard Copeland. Speaking in the 80s and the 90s, early 2000s were filled with superstar talent. But the NBL from 1 to 30 is as good, I think, as anywhere else in the world. Who's your pick for the MVP?
Bryce. I love Bryce. I've been accused. It's funny. I live in Melbourne. I don't support a team, obviously. I live in Melbourne, and I've been accused of being a Bryce cheerleader. I'm okay with that. He's greatness, and I think we should, at every opportunity, celebrate that and enjoy that, because who knows? I hope he's not gone at the end of the year, and I hope he doesn't go overseas. And I don't think he will, to be honest. I think he'll do everything he can to stay at Perth. There's a legacy element here with Bryce, but we've got to enjoy that. We've got to celebrate it. And if you get a bit swept up in it, so what? Who cares? Because some of the names that you mentioned in the 80s and the 90s, Josh, like I reckon some would look back now and kind of go, gee, I wish we celebrated Andrew Gaze more. Or gee, I wish we celebrated Leroy more or Derek more or Leonard more. Or I could, the Adelaide dynasty that they had with Brett Maher and Darnell Mean, Kevin Brooks, I could keep going. So, yeah, Bryce is my MVP pick because he is single-handedly winning games. And I think that that's having a greater impact than Kendrick Davis. I think he's had a great year. Parker obviously had a great year before things have happened at New Zealand. So we've got some great contenders, but to me, there is one standout right now, and it's the benchmark.
Yeah, I get accused all the time as well, mate. Being a Perth boy and a Perth Wildcats fan, I love Bryce and the Wildcats, but he's had an incredible season. But yeah, you mentioned Kendrick Davis there. I think Trey Kell's obviously putting together an incredible season so far, and we could sit here all day and just rattle off the top. We could do a Derek Rucker top 15, which massive shout to Derek as well. I know he wasn't too fond of our top 15 as well, and all of our comments around his list, but we'll have a chat about that another day. But
he's fine. He knows there's nothing personal. He's fine.
It's all a part of the game for sure, mate. But let's get into the NBL media side of it. And this is where I wanted to really have a chat to somebody out. And I reached out to Luke in the media team as well, just to sort of get my head around everything. And we cop a few questions here and there. And obviously we're not affiliated with the NBL at all just yet. And, we're still obviously a product, I guess, of the NBL, but we're not working directly with the NBL. But that's been the biggest confusion, I guess. If we look to the NBA, for example, as a little bit of a vision board, realistically, you've got the NBA, and then you've got TNT on NBA, you've got NBA on ESPN, you've got all these little branches underneath the NBL. Can you sort of give us a bit of an insight into how the NBL media works? So you guys aren't directly employed by the NBL, you're essentially contractors, is what I've sort of gathered a little bit here.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm glad you asked it, actually. Kind of to what we're talking further about, all these clandestine meetings about who we're going to blow up this week and all that sort of stuff. So for full transparency, Josh, I contract to the NBL for both on-air and off-air services. So I have a role in terms of content development and creation and stuff like that. And a little bit of crossover with broadcast in terms of, what are the main sort of stories and talking points. I don't touch rosters and stuff like that. There's obviously too big of a conflict there. But so I'm kind of privy to both. I'm kind of privy to some of the content type meetings that we have, and then also the on-air side of things. The biggest difference, I think, between the NBL and any other sport, which maybe is why it's hard to understand for some, is that the NBL is still at a stage where it's trying to drive conversation, trying to get more space in the papers, more space online, items in the news and all that sort of stuff. And it's not easy to do. Like the NBL season starts in September, which is the same time as AFL and NRL finals. And then through the peak period of kind of December, you've got Test cricket, you've got the Australian Open in January, you've got the Melbourne Cup and the Spring Racing Carnival in November. And then by the time our season's almost finished is the start of AFL and NRL again. So it's competitive. So what needs to happen a lot of the time is that the NBL, there's just not enough working media in basketball right now. I hope that one day that will change. But at the moment, News Corp have got 2 dedicated journalists. ESPN obviously have one in Olgun. Kane Pittman's doing his thing in the States and trying to drive a bit of that. But there are bits and pieces here or there, and there are local journalists covering it. But there's not there's something like some ridiculous number of accredited AFL media. Likewise in the NRL. And even, I go to the cricket, obviously, and the media boxes and the media areas are full of all these different journalists. So we're not there yet. We're still kind of, the trajectory is still trying to go up. So sometimes a lot of these conversations and opinions have to come via NBL media, or they're not going to come at all. So as I say, there's nothing personal. No one's out to get anyone. I think for every one negative type thing, like I mentioned some of the players that retweet things or put things on their Instagram, there's actually 30 positive things as well. It's just that the negatives stand out. So that's kind of the role at the moment that NBL media kind of has to play in the ecosystem, is to help keep conversation going, help people talking about it, get them to games, get them to be watching, because sometimes if we're not, then no one is.
Yeah, and it's a tough one as well, because if you I know the NBA is on a completely different status right now compared to what the NBL is, but if you follow their model, I guess, a little bit. They've got these small podcasts that are popping up here, there, everywhere. And the NBA does a pretty good job, obviously, of wrapping some of them under some ESPN banners or the
Yeah.
TNT banners. And obviously that comes with money, and obviously those people doing those shows are going to be pretty good. But I think that's where one area of improvement for the NBL can be. And I'm not by any stretch of imagination trying to push the basketball fix down your throat right now, but there are a couple of NBL podcasts which are out there in which are covering and creating a good product, but they're not getting that engagement, I think, from the overall NBL product. And I think that's a good way for the league to not put much money into anything that's going on, still getting content every week at a pretty high quality and still getting spoken about. But it's definitely interesting. And like you said, with obviously the contracting side, do you believe not working exclusively from the NBL, with the NBL, sorry, hinders your opinions at all? Is there a little bit of, what you can and can't say, or does it sort of open it up, right? Because we've seen Felix, especially with all the Adelaide and Melbourne United stuff going hammer and tong on Twitter and X and whatever it's called now.
Yeah.
Do you think it sort of hinders or help your views not really being 100% owned by the NBL?
I don't think it'd matter with Felix. That man's a wildcat. He marches to the beat of his own drum, and he's doing a great job. So I think, Josh, again, this is another one of those misconceptions that while we're here, we may as well knock out of the park. Not once in my time, and I think it's 5 years on broadcast and then 2.5 years on radio before that doing Melbourne games, not once have I ever been told what to say. And I want to be super clear on that because, again, there's this bit of this Twitter bullshit misconception about controlled narratives and stuff like that. Not once in my time have I experienced anyone from the NBL, from the owner right down to anyone below that, being told what we can and can't say. The only things that we sort of really don't touch are owners, and that's fair enough. I think that's they don't sort of need to come into a lot of the conversations, but not once have we ever been told. And in fact, there have been times where we have, and I'll just say collectively, all of us have said some things, and you go, "Oh, gee, wonder how that's going to go." And it's been nothing but supportive from the NBL because there hasn't been any lines crossed. So we are independent in that sense, but we're also supported by the NBL to kind of almost go your hardest. And if there's an issue, then we'll get a little tap on the nose. But again, I don't even think I've seen that happen over the journey either.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one for sure. And we sort of spoke about it earlier on with the back and forth between, I guess, players and obviously the league in general, and obviously players and media members as well. What have you made of that? Because there aren't too many, I know it happens every now and then, especially in the NBA, but there aren't too many players who go out there and actively call out the league or, actively call out media commentators. What are you making of it all? Because it's sort of a bit of a first for the NBL.
Well, it's the beauty of being courtside. You commentate footy or you commentate cricket, you're up in the stands, you're quite separated from the players. Like, gradually over the last 3 years, we're doing more and more games back in the venue, which is awesome. And I think that's changed a lot of different things. One of it is that we've started to develop relationships again with players. Pretty hard to have a relationship when you're in a studio the other side of the country. So use Parker as an example last year. So that blew up. That made national news and all that sort of stuff. But what happened since then was that Derek and Parker took the conversation offline, sorted it out, and they now get along really well. There are other players that have had issues with the top 15 and those sorts of things. Damon has had people take exception, I should say, to some of the things he said. Even Gazy, God love him, has had people sort of ask why he said that. But you just have mature conversations and you work it out and you move on like adults. So I think that's why you see more of it in the NBL than what you see in any other sport in this country, because we're actually close enough that we can have these interactions.
Yeah, I love it. I put an article out at the start of the year, and it got a bit of traction for all the wrong reasons. I wrote the title as "Make the NBL Great Again," and it was an absolute piss take, essentially. But one thing I wrote in there was, it was just basically things that I'd love to see the NBL do. And one thing I wrote in there is just continue the courtside announcing. Like, I just think that is the most important thing for basketball, is having a person sitting right there, watching the play, absorbing the crowd, and then delivering that to you, because it's such an intense sport from start to finish. And like I said, I think you guys are doing an amazing job with that as well. And I'd love to see that go forward. But one thing I want to touch on right now is, you sort of spoke on it a little bit. Now we've got the football, the rugby, the cricket, everything going on in Australia, and they get massive time on Channel 7 and Channel 9, Channel 10 News. the NBL, I've seen for certain periods there get a 5-second run of last night's game
Yeah.
and then it's gone. And that will be all you'll see for a 4-hour news bulletin. How do you sort of, I guess, start to push the NBL more into the, the sort of 7, 9, 10 national news sort of broadcasts?
Well, this comes back to what we were talking about earlier. And actually, that question, I hope, helps everyone understand what role the NBL media have to play here. We would love to have all the mainstream news cover NBL every night. And I know you're in Perth. Like Lockie Reed's a great mate of mine. Lockie does an amazing job driving the Wildcats and also driving the NBL. There are Brent Costello in Tasmania does an awesome job with the Jack Jumpers and driving that coverage. I could go around the States. We need more and more of them, obviously, but it's about continuing to make stars of the players and having things like that picked up. But the other side of it, which is the world we live in, is things like the Montrezl Harrell issue in Melbourne, the Parker issue last year. Some of that stuff gets picked up more than, oh, wasn't that a great performance and someone had 25 and 10? That doesn't really move the needle too much in this modern day. But some of the controversial things do. So again, why do some things get blown up more than others? Because that's what mainstream media are kind of keeping an eye out for. I don't love it all the time. You can have your views on sort of the direction of journalism and where it's going in this country and around the world, but that's the cold hard facts. So we've got to keep pushing. We've got to keep making stars out of Bryce Cotton and Chris Golding and Sam Froling and all of these guys and trying to keep pushing forward that way. It's not easy though. It's competitive.
No, it's definitely competitive. And obviously I think it's going to go into the future like you're mentioning. But what are some of the things that you guys might be speaking about behind the scenes that you can share in terms of obviously how to improve the overall product of not only the commentary team, but the media team and everything else to really pump this whole thing up? Because the NBL from, when you would have started commentating essentially to now is a completely different product. Larry bought the league for less than what essentially owners are buying these individual teams from nowadays. So it's just blown out of perspective realistically, hasn't it?
It's interesting, Josh. When Corey died not that long ago, we put together the overtime special, and we got Cam and Liam in the studio, and we got some people, people from all over the world sending tributes. I wanted my contribution to be to produce that and put it together. There was no shortage of people who were going to be willing to jump in front of the camera and the microphone. But I thought that could be my way of thanking him for everything he did to me. So myself and a couple of others worked on producing it, and we produced it on the day. Part of that is that I had to go back and watch a lot of old games when Corey first started getting involved in the commentary. Now, watching those, my first thought looking at them was, my God, this broadcast looks average. The graphics, the cameras, the clarity, the whole works. So I challenge anyone to go and watch a broadcast from 7 years ago and compare it to what we're doing now. We don't get it right all the time. There are things that are stuffed up. There are things that could be better. But even just that natural improvement of broadcast from 7, 8 years ago to now, I think is really, really obvious. And then the courtside thing that you spoke about, it's what we all want. And when I say we all, I mean the NBL as well, not just us as commentators. It's what we all want. But it's, these things cost money. It's not just we're going to do courtside instead of back in the studio. There is a lot of other logistics involved. And I'm talking all the way down to flights and accommodation and cab charges and per diems for meals. And it all adds up. So you can kind of put your fingers in your ear and just go, they should do every game courtside, or you can try and understand the challenges. What I would say to that, though, is that 3 years ago was the first time we went back into the venue for the Sydney and New Zealand Grand Final Series. That was 3 games. The following season was something like 20 or 30 games, mostly Melbourne and Sydney games. Last year was 50-odd. This year is going to be about 75, 80 plus finals. So, the improvement's there. And I think for those who are sort of doubting what the NBL are doing, just those numbers alone should tell you that it's going up pretty dramatically year in year. Will we ever get to the stage where every game's in the venue? I don't know. I hope so, but there might be reasons why we can't. But I think the vast majority would be the best result here.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, like you spoke about there, going back like 8, 9, 10 years ago, I remember I used to play NBA 2K as a kid, and I'm being genuinely serious when I say this. there was some New Zealand Breakers games which looked worse than a video game, and that was just
Yeah.
it was just how it was. But it was just because, like you said, everything cost a lot of money. The league wasn't making much money at all. It was probably losing, I think, a lot more money than what it was making in terms of everything. But yeah, like we've spoken about, where the league is now is obviously such a greater point than what it is obviously 10, 15, 20 years ago as well, which is super, super exciting, obviously, to be a part of it all on a very outside looking in. But, you know, and obviously for you guys as well, it's really, really important. But how do you ensure that all of the commentary sort of remains engaging, I guess, for both seasoned listeners, and then obviously you've got the new people coming in as well, because that's the biggest part of it. It's got to be fun, but you've also got to sort of explain who this player is, what they're doing, what they're averaging, and sort of how they've been in their NBL career, essentially.
And this is one of the biggest challenges, Josh. No doubt about it. And you know, I've sort of tried to stay away a lot more this year from sort of like Twitter in game and after games, because what we've got is we are trying to appeal to so many different groups, and that's tough. But that's the reality. We're trying to appeal to the rusted on audience, the guys and girls who love hoops and are going to watch as many games as they can. We're trying to appeal to those who are like family. So my best mate is an example. He's got a 7-year-old who started playing, and all of a sudden now, you know, my best mate and his son sit down and watch a couple of games a week. If we get too technical and we start talking Spanish and those sorts of things, how does he explain that to his son? He can't. And then we've got that group. We've got the group who perhaps were lost to the game, who we're trying to win back. We've got the group who are the casual sports fan who see a live game on and go, oh yeah, I'll watch that. So I know it's hard, and I know that some want greater analysis and some want more in-depth things and use of specific stats and metrics like offensive rating, defensive rating, and net rating, those sorts of things. I know that for some that's really important, but it's a really hard thing to do to appeal to everyone. So I guess you've got to resign yourself after a while to realize that there are going to be some people who don't like everything that you do. We just have to try our very best to try and cater to everyone. It's kind of like having an ice cream shop, and you're going to have some people that want chocolate, some people that want strawberry, some people that want peppermint, whatever. You're not going to please everyone, but I guess overall to try and do something that's, as you say, entertaining, engaging, makes you want to come back and watch next time, that hopefully if we can get as close to that as we can, then that's a good result.
No, definitely. Now, this is the last question, mate, and I really appreciate your time. I know we're going to get you up to the Kings and Phoenix game this afternoon, which is going to be an absolute thriller. But there was a bit of a situation that happened in late November there as well, between obviously the Adelaide 36ers and Melbourne United. Now, if you can't say too much this situation, that is completely fine. But you sat down with NBL CEO Dave Stevenson on November the 26th. The episode was published, and then about 5 or 6 hours, I'd listened to the podcast. It was about 5 or 6 hours later, it was actually mysteriously taken down. There was a lot of people asking questions as to why it was taken down. What was the reason behind it? Are you able to shed any light? Because obviously there was Melbourne saying that there was no racial comments. Then Dave Stevenson was on the podcast saying that there was obviously a racial sort of comments and things said to the players. So obviously you're a bit of a part of it, and I know you might not know everything about it, but what are some of your insights into that situation?
Not a lot, to be honest, and I'm not avoiding the question. It was essentially between the NBL and the two clubs. I was asked to do the interview, and you know, to be transparent, I said I only want to do it if we can ask the questions that need to be asked. And Dave's a fantastic operator and a really, really good interview subject because he's pretty honest. What happened after that, to be honest, I'm not totally sure. And it was one of those things where you can kind of ask questions and you can go, what happened here? Or you can realize that there are things happening at a level far greater than you. And that's basically what happened. So I wish I could shed more light on it. To be totally transparent, the interview happened and it was published. What happened after that is essentially between the NBL, Melbourne, and Adelaide.
No, definitely. I think it's one of those things. A lot of people are still asking questions, and you know, obviously you want the answers and you want to know and you want to have full transparency, but there are some things that just can't come out from maybe a legal standpoint as well and all that sort of stuff.
I think the one thing I would add to that whole situation, Josh, from the moment it happened now, I was in New Zealand on a holiday. I was watching the game on the plane on the way home from New Zealand, and I went, oh my goodness, this is going to blow up. I can't remember an issue in sport in my time in this industry. I can't remember an issue as complex as that. I don't want to dive into who's right and who's wrong and should they have been suspended or those things. That everyone can have their own opinions on that. Again, an opinion is an opinion. It's neither right nor wrong. But I don't remember an issue that was as complex and as challenging on a number of fronts as what that was.
Yeah, it was definitely a bit of a. I was watching the UFC that day, and then I was watching the UFC on one screen, and then over on the other side was the NBL, and I was like, "Am I watching?"
Would have looked the same, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it looked genuinely the same. There was no volume on there, and I could hear the crowd going crazy on the UFC. So, now obviously, we're not trying to make fun of the situation. It was a terrible situation, and I think the league tried to handle it as best as they could. And it's one of those things that, like you said, it's never been seen before. So there's no bluept to obviously make those decisions about suspensions and fines and everything as well. So I know there's always been a lot of talk about it, but I think that sort of puts it to bed from the Basketball Fix perspective as well. But Jack, mate, obviously I've had a tremendous time talking to you. You've been really, really great with your time. I know you've got a massive week coming up with obviously the cricket. You've got the basketball tonight, and you've still got to spend some time with the family as well, mate. So thank you very much for coming on today's episode, mate, and I'm looking forward to chatting very, very shortly.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Josh, and to you and your boys. And keep up the good work. We need as many people talking about the league as possible. So good job.
No, I really appreciate it, mate. We'll chat soon.